What's up? Welcome to another episode of Bitches Love Sports. This is a specially scheduled episode, and I will not be here long at all because I've got things to do. I've got people to train, I've got a workout to get in myself. But what I didn't want to do was let another day go by where I didn't talk about what happened with the Cowboys this past weekend. Um, my schedule has been a little weird, and honestly, had we won that game, I probably would not go live today. It would have probably been later in this week where I would have given a reaction. What's up, JV? How's it going? It would have been later in this week though. I would have given a reaction, done a preview of the next game. I did not anticipate going live at this point in the week, but I didn't want another day to go by. Somebody actually asked me. They were like, "So, are you still gonna cover the Cowboys?" And I'm like, "Damn, I know I've been inconsistent." But I didn't think I gave the impression that I was just all of a sudden gonna walk away from the team. I get it though. I do kind of get it. Because when I first started this podcast, I was not a Cowboys fan. That is something that developed later, very early on in the podcast, yes. But when I first started it, I was not a Cowboys fan. And I think some people think that I just started covering the team because I started writing about the team. But it was actually the opposite. I became a fan of the team and I was looking for opportunities to write. And it just so happened that it was a Cowboys blog that gave me the opportunity to get into writing. But I was so excited that it was a Cowboys blog. I'm the type of person that when I say I care about these players, some of my favorite players in the entire NFL play for the Dallas Cowboys, I mean that. But I also have to be honest about the fact that it's it's hard to defend them right now. It is. And if you follow me on Twitter, you kind of know this perspective. I think if you follow me on Twitter, you can tell from my posts that I had no intention of walking away from the team, of ignoring the team or anything. But in the past, I've done a lot of fangirling. I've done a lot of defense, especially of Dak Prescott. I did a lot of defending of CeeDee Lamb, especially early in his career. I did a lot of praising of CeeDee Lamb this year. Um, and there's going to have to be a pause on that. Not because I don't feel the same way, not because I feel like they're not good players, but because when it comes to what other people are saying about them, and I did unfortunately put myself through the torture of watching Get Up yesterday, and a couple of other shows on the 3 and 4 letter networks yesterday, kind of on accident. Sunday night, I woke up in the middle of the night and I couldn't get back to sleep, and I turned on ESPN and I was on Twitter for a little bit and I was playing games on my phone and I just kind of passed out on the couch. And when I woke up, Get Up happened to be on, and it seemed like they dedicated almost the entire episode to the Dallas Cowboys. So I just so happened to hear some of the things that they were saying about the Cowboys. So when it comes to what they're saying, what the narrative is right now, there's not a lot that I can do to combat that. So that's why I say what I say about, me not being able to fangirl as much, me not being able to defend them. It's not that I don't think they deserve it. I still, my favorite players are still my favorite players. And I hope they see success in the future. I grew up a Saints fan. I saw Drew Brees not get a Super Bowl until his 9th season. I saw him only have one playoff win before he finally got his Super Bowl. So I'm like, I've seen quarterbacks go through a lot of shit and then just all of a sudden, boom, they get it. So that's a big part of the reason why, to me, I'm just like, yeah, Dak's got a lot to prove, but I don't think it's impossible because I've seen it done before. But as far as like me saying that a lot publicly, defending him publicly, I'm like, I'm not going to put myself through that. JV said he really wants to know what they were beefing about exactly. Are you talking about Dak and CD? I think a lot of people have that question. But let's talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's come up since that game, because we all know what happened during the game. If you like the Cowboys enough to watch my podcast, you saw the game, you know what happened. And you've probably also seen a lot of other content creators already. And I don't say that because I think they're like above me, which I mean, major props. And I actually said this to one of the content creators. I was talking about some of the struggles I'm having, building my channel, getting consistent. And they were like, well, when we started, this person was like, when we started, we didn't have this and that. And I was like, yeah, but y'all are the standard now. Like, I have to meet that standard if I want to, keep doing this. And so, props to the guys who have been doing this for years and years, and in some cases, a decade or more. But when I look at my statistics, like the information that YouTube gives us about what our audience is doing and what they look at, I can see that a lot of y'all, almost all of y'all, watch other content creators. So that's why I say, like, yeah, a lot of the good stuff y'all have heard. I think Okoye Media is either in the middle of or just wrapped up. I don't know. I was watching a really good film breakdown that I was sad that I had to walk away from. But I'm going to cover some of the more major points. There are people who are really good at breaking down the film and what happened during the game, and we'll cover that a little bit. But the reason why my thumbnail included in the hot seat, and I should have honestly put DanQuinn on that picture as well, but the reason why I did that is because, to me, the major conversations that are happening right now, as far as what could impact the Dallas Cowboys' future, and I think what a lot of fans are really concerned about at this point, now that the game is over and the season is over, is what's going to happen in terms of, some of the people that are having the blame put on them for what happened on Sunday. Real quick, I do want to shout out Eastside Harold, who's in the chat. Props to you and your Texans. I gotta admit, and I know I said this in a previous broadcast, like towards the end of the season, I was talking about CJ Stroud and how good he looked and how I felt like he deserved way more attention and praise. But I just gotta shout him out again and shout out the Texans again. What Ryans has done, considering how everybody was talking about, when he got that job, D'Amico Ryans, that is, talking about, oh, it's another black coach being set up for failure in the NFL. And he came in and was just like, who being set up? Not me. I'm about to come in and transform this team. You will not recognize this team by the time I get my hands on it. And he really did that. And CJ Stroud has just proved all the doubters wrong. So Eastside Harold, congratulations. I'm glad that one of us has a team that is still in the playoffs and doing well. So JV says DQ is gone. Let's go ahead and start there. I wasn't going to start there, but let's go ahead and start there. Let's start with DanQuinn. I was going to start with Mike McCarthy, but we can start with DanQuinn instead. And in a lot of ways, DanQuinn and Mike McCarthy have similar issues in terms of public perception, where it's like, okay, the players really like you, but what does that translate to on the field? And I'm going to be honest, the conversation on DanQuinn doesn't even have to be that long because I feel like there's not that much up for debate. He's gotten head coaching offers in the past that he's turned down for whatever reason. I don't know if he didn't want to be a head coach. I don't know if they just didn't offer him the right thing. But at this point, it's really just kind of like, okay, we've seen, your gimmicks and your tricks. We've seen what you do in terms of, player flex and putting players in positions to, execute roles that a lot of people didn't think they were built for. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. This year, in terms of what he tried to do with, people who needed to play the linebacker roles, it seemed to work less often than it actually did work. I got to the point where I was sick of turning on ESPN and hearing them talk about the size of the people that were put in the linebacker roles. And I say the people who were put in the linebacker roles because, like, a lot of times those were converted safeties. We got to the point where people really were like, who are the linebackers on this roster? And I don't know who was in charge of that. But what I can say is in this game especially, it almost seemed like DanQuinn, I don't know, outsmarted himself. I'm just looking down my timeline, and I know DanQuinn is a professional. He gets paid millions to play his role. But when I'm looking down my timeline, and I'm just seeing everybody being like, why are we playing so much zone? What the hell is going on? I feel like the paid professional should also be looking at the field and being like, why are we playing so much zone? What the hell are we doing? And fix that. And even with me not being the first person to necessarily catch that, I'm going to say this. One thing that we did know going into this game about Jordan Love is that he did well against the blitz, right? Which I think a lot of people don't really realize that about such a young quarterback. But that was something that was well known. That was something that people said. It was something that if you watch Jordan Love, and especially compared to the beginning of the season, right? Because what one of the things that really got Jordan Love a lot of attention was how different he looked from the beginning of the season to the end of the season going into the postseason. The performances he put on that got Green Bay into the playoffs is what people were impressed by. And so him performing so well against the blitz, One thing that you start to realize watching quarterbacks that are good against the blitz, like Jordan Love and like Dak Prescott, if we're being quite honest, he's been pretty good against the blitz, is that there's a reason for that. And one of the main reasons for that is the fact that obviously, they're able to get the ball out usually before they get sacked most of the time. But also they have a unique ability to focus on their targets and just not really worry about the danger that's happening in front of them. That's somebody else's job. They have O linemen and pass pro for that. They're going to focus on their targets and getting the ball to their targets. And quarterbacks that are good against the blitz are really confident in their ability to scramble in the pocket if they have to, as well as just focus on their targets, make sure that they, do their reads, find an open one and get the ball out, right? And so I'm like, if you are facing a quarterback that we know is good at that, because we know he's good against the blitz, why would you give his targets so much damn space? I don't know what the hell happened. And there were no adjustments. There were no answers. And so that right there alone is enough reason for me to be like, all right, I'm ready to see somebody else. And I'm gonna also pose this question to Cowboys Nation. And this is a question I haven't heard anybody ask, and maybe someone has answered it. But imagine some of the best defensive performances that we've seen. Like, imagine some of the most impressive games in terms of what our defense did. And imagine what those games would have looked like without MicahParsons. And I don't mean just in terms of what he did for the pass rush and in terms of his sacks. One thing that MicahParsons talked about this season was being on the impact wave. And I would argue that he's always made an impact. A lot of the things that he did had ripple effects down the rest of the defense. A lot of the cool things that we saw, whether it came to, other players getting interceptions, like a lot of those interceptions happened because of what MicahParsons did in terms of either flustering a quarterback, in terms of making a quarterback having to take longer to get the ball out than they normally would, in terms of making a quarterback have to second guess where they wanted the ball to go. Just sometimes Micah just seemed to scare dudes. There were times where, D-Law got a hit or a sack because a quarterback was literally running away from MicahParsons and ran into D-Law. Those are some of my favorite moments, if I'm being quite honest. Those are some of my favorite things to see. It's like, oh, you thought you were going somewhere. You thought you were getting away. Like, yeah, we got another dog on the other side. And so, JV, no, I'm not saying MicahParsons needs help. What I'm saying is that the impact of MicahParsons made DanQuinn look like a way better defensive coordinator than he really was. That's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is a lot of the success that is attributed to DanQuinn and his so-called genius and what he did in terms of player flex, a lot of that was actually, a lot of that could be attributed to the impact of such an elite player like MicahParsons. And so what I'm saying is, if we look at the best defensive performances, a lot of the ones that elicited a lot of praise for DanQuinn, like, oh my goodness, look at the defense, look at DanQuinn, blah, 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 blah. And then we think about, okay, well, what if Micah hadn't had the impact in those games that he had? And we think about what those games might have looked like. And then we think about what that might have meant for DanQuinn before this season. That's what I'm saying. So I do think MicahParsons needs help in the sense that the whole defense needs help. I mean, does anybody else need to talk about the linebacker situation? I mean, hello. And I'm not saying that Micah himself needs help, but I'm just saying as far as like Micah having to play different roles and feeling like he's split up and can't really hone in on one position and make the impact that he wants to make. Yeah, I think, having better players, bigger dudes, better dudes could even help Micah in terms of him just being able to focus and concentrate and figure out what role he plays best. Even if it's 2 roles, even if it's 3, at least it wouldn't be like, well, we moved Micah over here. Now we have, problems over here. Well, if we move Micah over there, we won't have somebody else. So yeah, in that sense, I do think Micah could benefit from some better players on defense. But nah, I'm talking about DanQuinn and why I'm not mad at the people who say he needs to go. And just some of the things that I think are contributing to that sentiment is what I'm talking about, JV. JV said Eastside Harold needs to retire from entering Dallas Cowboys spaces. Eastside is being relatively harmless today. Considering how he could be trolling the Cowboys right now, because let's be real, the Texans, they posted something about being Texas's team. And somebody told me about it. They were like, oh, the Texans is trolling, or the Texans is talking shit. And I saw the post and I was like, honestly, they could be way more rude right now if they wanted to, considering how people in Texas treat the Texans compared to how they treat the Cowboys. So if they want to make posts calling themselves Texas's team and brag on how good they did, and that's all they're doing, more power to them. Have fun. You earned it. Do your shit, Texans. So yeah, that's my perspective on DanQuinn right now. I feel like he has shown more weaknesses than we can afford to keep around. And if we think about what his defense would probably look like without the good fortune of the Dallas Cowboys drafting such an elite player like MicahParsons, I think if we really think about that, we would start really looking a little bit differently about DanQuinn's flaws. We'd look a little bit harder at his flaws, So that's it. If DanQuinn leaves, whether it's he gets another job, whether he gets fired, I'm not mad regardless. It takes a lot for me to actually say that I want someone to be fired. So that's why I'm not saying that. So me saying I wouldn't be mad if he was gone is about as harsh as you're going to get from me today. So who's next? Mike McCarthy. Whew. Mike McCarthy is in a tough spot because he has done so much good for this team, especially for the players. And that's honestly, I said when the game first ended that I couldn't find the words, and that's a lot for me. And I still feel that way. I'm still having trouble finding the words, and that says a lot for me because I don't think Mike McCarthy coached that game well. He didn't. The team looked terrible. They looked unprepared. But I also have to think about if a couple of those interceptions hadn't happened, if some of those attempted passes had actually been connections instead of being dropped passes, missed passes, grounded balls, what would that offense have looked like? Instead of them, punting on their first possession, would that drive not have been extended? And so I said I was going to talk about Mike McCarthy and DanQuinn at the same time. I guess I need to talk about Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott at the same time, because I feel like as disappointed as we are in what we saw from a coaching perspective, from a scheme perspective, I feel like Dak Prescott's performance made that look a lot worse than what it really was. Hold on one second, y'all. It is like chilly in here, and I'm gonna blow my nose. I'm gonna be right back. Okay, can y'all hear me? I think y'all can. My earbuds are actually working today. I don't know if y'all know this, but like a cold front came through Austin. Luckily, the whole city didn't freeze over because there wasn't as much precipitation. But like it is enough for me to like feel a cold chill every now and then, even though my heater's on. It's like mad cold outside. Anyway, but yeah, so like I was saying, I feel like Dak Prescott's performance made that game look like it was more poorly coached than it really was. Because I think had it not been for some of his mistakes, and he said this in his post-game press conference, he admitted that he had a problem with the fact that he was reading one thing pre-snap and then they changed it post-snap. That was disappointing, partially because I feel like everybody knew they did that. And I'm like, how were you not prepared for that? There were times, one of the things I've learned, shout out to the people who are helping me get better at watching film and break down film, is that like part of the reason for sending somebody in motion is to like read what the defense is doing. And there were times that even I, looking at this, I was just like, okay, well, they're acting pre-snap like they're going to play zone, but I really don't feel like that's what they're going to do. And a lot of the issues that we saw were that they were actually playing like really good coverage. Like they weren't giving our receivers any breathing room whatsoever. And so just I feel like, the missteps that Dak admitted to, as well as the ones that he didn't, if you improve Dak Prescott in those areas, the offense itself looks a lot better. And when the offense looks better, it makes Mike McCarthy look better. So yes, the offense looked atrocious, but it's hard for me to blame that entirely on Mike McCarthy unless we want to say, well, Dak should have been more prepared, and that's Mike McCarthy's fault. Is that Mike McCarthy's fault? Is it Shoddy's fault? Is it somebody else's fault? I don't know. But I understand people's desire to get away from Mike McCarthy. I do. But it's hard for me to justify actually getting rid of the guy, considering that for the most part, he's done well. And this was also his first year really being able to implement the offense that he wanted to implement and call plays the way that he wanted to call them. Firing him does not sit right, but something has to change because honestly, from an objective point of view, it's like you look at it and it's like, how do you even get back to a healthy and respectful locker room culture after that? We had players this year really riding for Dak Prescott, even on the defensive side of the ball. And I just have to wonder if they're going to look at him the same, and if they're going to respect him the same, and if they're going to trust his leadership and his abilities the same. I don't know. And then same thing with Mike McCarthy. You do have to wonder how they're going to look at him. Now, I'm gonna read some of y'all's comments real quick, and then I'm gonna read something that Jane Slater posted that actually gives us some insight into how the players are looking at Mike McCarthy, and then I'm gonna tell you why that's a big ass problem and it pisses me off. So give me 1 second. Let's see. JV said Dak didn't play well either. I agree. Dwayne said, I'm not firing a coach that got us to the playoffs 3 years in a row. What he can do is get a new DC. That is one solution. Like I said, I wouldn't be mad at that. Fire the linebacker coach, Joe Witt. Welcome to the defensive coordinator position. It's one perspective. Run game coordinator fired. Okay. CeeDee Lamb has to play better as well. We do need CeeDee to be more consistent. I don't know what happened to him on Sunday. I really don't. I was disappointed in what I saw. I know a lot of people were like, he should have done some, or no, with the Jair Alexander, when Jair Alexander pushed him, and a lot of people were like, yeah, he should have done something. And some people like, well, what you want him to do? Fight him? No, I don't want him to fight him because like we'd already had 2 ridiculous penalties before that even happened. So that's the last thing that I would have wanted to do. But I do feel like there are ways on the football field that you can assert your toughness and make it known that you're not going to put up with certain bullshit without incurring a penalty. Like CD didn't even so much as turn and look at this dude. I'm like, turn around, do something. Let us know you clapping back. Something. Like, don't just walk off. So I don't know, like, knowing Jair Alexander, there's no way he wasn't talking shit. And I don't know what he was saying, what he was doing. And it was rough to watch because if you've watched me in the past, Jair Alexander is another one of my favorite players. CD is one of my favorites. And I like Jair Alexander too. And I've said it before, he's an asshat, but he's a really good player. And I say he's an asshat because he's always pulling some kind of damn antics. Like the dude is a menace, from a personal perspective. But I do like him as a player. He's one of my favorites. I like the guy. And so that was tough to watch. I would have rather seen my 2 favorite players fighting on the field than see one of them push the other one, and the one who's like actually my favorite just kind of take it. I was not a fan. But I also know sometimes in situations like that, it can be questionable. And maybe CD was thinking about the 2 penalties that they already got and didn't want to risk incurring another one. Who knows? But here's a post from Jane Slater where she talked about how some of the players feel about Mike McCarthy. So this was something that Jane Slater posted on yesterday afternoon, and it's a few tweets in one thread. So give me a minute because it's going to take a read because it's several tweets. But she said, And this is via her Twitter, Slater NFL. She said, "To the fans who think this team has quit on Mike McCarthy, my conversations with players don't tell me that at all. Really interesting hearing them defend him, his culture, and how he's led them on the field and off of it. Their ownership of failing Mike is what stands out the most. Nuggets like wanting players on Saturday practices to bring their family so he can meet them and interact, meeting breaks to text a loved one and say thank you for their support, preservation of their bodies with rest days, his love of players like none I've had before." And that was a quote. Another quote: "In order to be a great leader, you have to be a great man yourself. Mike puts it all out there for everyone to be successful. I was told they know it's a business and Jerry Jones wants success, but they still believe they are close. Fans can roll their eyes, but I do think players' thoughts matter as Jerry Jones weighs this decision." Another player was frustrated with the stubbornness to stick to schemes on both sides of the ball, motion offenses killing defenses, and concern that Dak panics when first read is not there. So she talked a lot about the positive there and a little bit about the negative. But let's focus on the positive, because honestly, and I've been saying this since before even the season started, I love how Mike McCarthy advocates for his players. I love that he looks at them as human beings. I love the way that he considers their mental health, their physical health, all of that. But what the players have basically done with this performance is put Mike McCarthy in a position where it looks like that approach doesn't get results. And that's bad not only for the Dallas Cowboys, but for other players who might have a hope of getting a coach like Mike McCarthy, because now other teams are going to look at that and be like, yeah, the players are well taken care of. They're healthier physically and mentally, but does that actually translate to success? Seems like it translates to, postseason failure. And maybe being harder on your team, maybe being a little tougher on your team is the way to get success and build a dynasty, so on and so forth. So it's one of those situations where it's like, if you really do, players appreciate everything that Mike McCarthy has done for you and the way that he's advocated for you to have a work-life balance and to take care of your mental health and to take care of your physical health and not run you into the ground physically and mentally. What you should have done is show up for him. And you didn't. And so that could potentially not only lose you a coach, it could lose you the culture that you seem to value and care about so much. Because how can you justify it? Like, how can you say we deserve these things? We need these things. They're important. But then you don't show up. You don't actually deliver the performance that says this kind of culture can work in the NFL. This kind of culture, this kind of environment can actually produce results that we want. We can take good players and treat them well and be considerate of their health, both physically and mentally and emotionally. We can be considerate of their families and we can still win. Nah, players, what you have done is shown the entire NFL and all the fans is that, like, yo, when we get treated nice, when we get to stay in nice places for training camp, when we get to sleep in our beds before home games, we gonna show up and phone it in the postseason. And it's gonna be just like none of that ever happened anyway. So that is probably one of the most frustrating things for me as a person who wants to see players get treated better and to be treated human beings, not only within their own team, but by the media and everybody else. I hate, like, even had they lost, had they shown up a little bit tougher, maybe you could justify this approach. But now, am I frozen? Okay, I'm back. But now, for the Cowboys and any other team, any other player, any other coach that wants to justify this more balanced approach in terms of how players are treated off the field, it's going to be tough to convince anybody in leadership that that's what should actually happen. So I can't say with confidence that I expect Mike McCarthy to be on, but I will say somebody threw out the idea of Mike Tomlin coming in as a coach, and honestly, I would love to see that. I'm very curious in how that would go. So once again, I'm not going to say Mike should be fired, but Mike Tomlin coming in as a head coach, I would not be mad at that. JV says they got all these hateful sports pundits in the media feeling justified for all the BS they spewed all season. 100% JV. And it's so hard to watch because at this point, I can't do anything to defend it, no matter how bad I want to. Like I said, my favorite players are still my favorite players. I still care about these dudes, still want nothing but success for them. But there's nothing I can say. There's nothing I can say to defend them right now. Everything that they were saying about, oh, we're on the same page now. Oh, play called purpose, carpe omnia, all that bullshit sounds like bullshit. And the stuff that sounded like bullshit in terms of how people were talking about Dak and CD now looks and sounds like the truth. It sucks. It sucks for those of us who have really spent a lot of time defending these players, and who would love to keep defending them. JV, you were I don't want to say you're funny, but like, leave Harold alone. And Eastside Harold, don't refer to Jerry Jones as Master Jerry. Why I gotta always discipline y'all in the comments? Y'all are a mess. And actually, honestly, Eastside Harold, I'm not gonna put up your comment because it's rude. But I do think Jerry would. I think he could consider Mike Tomlin. I think he could. I think it would depend. I think it depends on a lot of factors besides race, as you suggested. There's a lot to consider with any coach that comes in here. One thing that I said a long time ago about the supposed coach of Jimmy Johnson was, I said, I don't think that the curse of Jimmy Johnson is just about Jimmy Johnson getting led into the Ring of Honor. What I said was, I think the curse of Jimmy Johnson is just representative of the fact that the same kind of stubbornness and the same holding on to of grudges that was keeping Jimmy Johnson out of the Ring of Honor was also what was holding this team back. In other words, Jerry Jones not being willing to grow, not being willing to advance and kind of change from his ways, that was the curse. And Jimmy Johnson not being led into the Ring of Honor was just like one symptom of that. So that's why when people were like, you believe in the curse of Jimmy Johnson? I was like, yeah, from that perspective. And so I think depending on how he can adjust, that will determine what kind of coach comes in here and what they're allowed to do. It'll also determine, what kind of players are willing to come to this organization, and what they're allowed to do. Let's see. Okay, so now JV and Eastside Harold are planning a boxing match. Cool. Let me know how that goes, guys. Clement says, DC DanQuinn and HC Mike McCarthy both need to go after this embarrassing performance at home and in the playoffs. Clement, we did talk about DanQuinn, so when you get a chance, just go back to the beginning. The culture in Dallas need to change, starting with ownership to the coaches and players. Now, considering what ownership actually does, I'm not going to say ownership actually needs to change. I actually think from an ownership perspective, Jerry Jones has been phenomenal. If there's one thing that he's done well, he's ensured that this franchise has money and makes money and continues to be one of the most famous sports franchises in any sport, in any country, in this entire world. So from an ownership perspective, yeah. Now, when we start talking about other leadership roles, GM, VP, that kind of stuff, I wouldn't be mad at seeing some changes there. I would not be mad at that at all. There's a lot to be said for the culture. Like I was just saying before you popped in, I don't know how long you've been watching, Clement, but before your comment, I was just saying, like, I actually did like the culture in the sense of, players being in a position to have a work-life balance and to take care of themselves mentally and physically. But I feel like they've put that into jeopardy. And so if that goes away, there's no one that they can really blame but themselves. So yeah, I've addressed DanQuinn, I've addressed Mike McCarthy. I kind of addressed Dak while addressing Mike McCarthy. But I'm going to say this directly about Dak. Like I said, it's been hard to find the words, and it still is. I didn't come in here with the script, show notes, anything. I'm just going off the cuff, so that's why I'm kind of pausing like that. Because what I was about to say, Dak needs to do better, and then in my mind, I'm like, nah, we got to say something better than that, because that's obvious. But I think some of the things that people have held on to in terms of Dak Prescott have been his leadership, some of the things that he's done where we have seen improvement. And I think a lot of people are at the point where, no, scratch that. A lot of people have been at the point where they don't want to hear from Dak Prescott anymore. They don't want to hear about what he's working on or what he plans to do better. We've pretty much heard everything he can say at this point. One we've seen Dak put up the type of performances that would have won that game on Sunday. We've seen him use his legs. We've seen him pick defenses apart. We've seen him do a great job of both reading and communicating about what he's seeing pre-snap and post-snap from the defense. We've seen him foil defenses' plans. We've seen him make incredible passes. We've seen him connect with his targets, with his receivers. We've seen some amazing things from Dak Prescott. The best version of Dak Prescott we've seen this season would have won that game on Sunday. And for some reason, that version didn't show up. And at this point, I think that's all that any Dallas Cowboys fan or Dak Prescott fans actually cares to see. We want to see that version of Dak Prescott show up consistently from the beginning of the season to the end. When the All-Pro list came out and people were like, how come Dak didn't get first team? And when people were talking about taking Lamar Jackson as MVP over Dak, there were some people who were like, well, how can they justify that? If they do that, it's only because they don't like Dak. As someone who watches a lot of football besides just the Dallas Cowboys, and I didn't tweet this because I don't tweet things I don't feel like arguing about. But as someone who watches a lot of football outside of the Dallas Cowboys, as someone whose second favorite team is the Baltimore Ravens and whose third favorite team is the Detroit Lions, I can 100% tell you anybody who felt like Lamar Jackson should be MVP over Dak Prescott was 100% justified. And a lot of it has to do with what I just said. It's that consistency that when even in their losses, I couldn't honestly watch their losses and say that it was Lamar Jackson's fault. Lamar Jackson looked like an exciting, dynamic quarterback who was putting the team on his back every game, win or lose. And I think that's a difference that people saw, is that people didn't really question how Lamar Jackson was going to show up as often as they questioned it for Dak Prescott. Whether it was home, away, whatever the weather was like, they didn't question it as much. And that confidence, seeing that level of consistency, seeing that high level of play week in and week out, that's what a lot of people were seeing in Lamar. That made them say like, nah, that's an MVP. And so I don't know if a lot of people weren't watching that or if they just liked Dak that much to where they didn't want to see it. But, I'm putting it out there. I'm not afraid to put it out there at this point because I feel like it's not the argument that it would have been a few weeks ago. Got a few more comments. Let's see. Clement, sorry, I don't know why I said your name like that. Said this team is mentally weak and can't handle any kind of adversity when teams who are physically, who are physical, I think that's what you meant to say, run the ball and we fold like a cheap tent. I don't like calling grown men and professional athletes weak. I will say that we've had a problem with physicality and that's a problem that needs to be solved ASAP. So you're right in that sense. But considering what they do go through, I'm not going to say that they're mentally weak. I don't know what the reason is for their lack of physicality because there could be other reasons for it besides being mentally weak. And I just don't like saying that about adults unless I hear them say something that suggests that actually is true. But I will say, yes, I do agree with you on the physical front. I do think that they need to be a lot more physical, but that goes back to that culture piece, right? When we're talking about how Mike McCarthy runs practices, how he runs the team and not being tough on them, how far does that trickle down? Does that trickle down to how they treat their opponents? And is that more justification for the people who say, hey, NFL teams, NFL players, we don't need to treat them like that. Not if we want results. So like I said earlier, the players have really put that in jeopardy. JV said, hold on one second. Sorry, y'all. Like I said, it's chilly here. JV said, if Dak has a major issue, it's trusting his teammates too much all the time. That's something that Brian Broaddus said to me during the offseason, and I argued with him about that for like 30 minutes. And I still don't think that's the case. I don't know. JV, if you have time, give me some examples in the comments and maybe we can talk about it. Do you do content, JV? Do you want to come on my show one day and we can talk about it? King Early the Wise said, is this a real channel? Yes, if you look at my channel, I have videos and I have content. I've never seen you before, so welcome. I don't know how to feel about that question, but it looks like Eastside Herald knows you. So Eastside, please tell your friend, even if that's a new friend, that yes, this is a real channel. Dwayne said, weak and trash is out of my vocabulary. I appreciate that and I respect it. I do feel like there's a lot more ways to describe what we've been seeing with this team besides calling them weak and trash. So yeah, I do agree that I want them to be more physical. That's been a problem throughout the season, and that's on both sides of the ball. If I'm being honest, we've seen glimpses of it, right? This isn't to say 100% of the time they're not physical enough. We've seen, earlier this season, we were praising Tony Pollard for his pass protection and how good he was blocking. We've seen great things on the defensive side from Hankins, from D-Law, from Micah, from Osa, from several people. But just as far as it being an identity, I think that's what people are wanting to see, especially when you consider the fact that a lot of teams who face the Cowboys face them as though the Cowboys are the villains. Not necessarily in the sense that, oh, the Cowboys have done something to me, but in the sense that, yo, if I'm playing the Cowboys, I'm on a big stage. I have to show up. I don't want to just win this game. I don't want to just score more points. I want to embarrass you. I want to beat you. And physically and on the scoreboard. And when you know someone is showing up like that against you, you have to be prepared to meet them with that same energy. And I just feel like we didn't do that consistently this season. And we definitely did not do it on Sunday. So yes, physicality, need more of it, 100%. Clement said, when former players are coming on Insta and saying that the Cowboys nation deserve better than that and that people got to leave, tell me that they care about the legacy they created. I agree with that 100%. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually something that I meant to talk about. And this might be the last thing that I address before I get out of here because I don't want to be late seeing my clients. But yeah, that was actually something that I was thinking about because we saw Jimmy Johnson on a live broadcast where he was technically at work, get visibly emotional about what he was seeing. We saw a response from I don't know why names aren't coming to me. Michael Irvin. We saw, who else? I think Emmett came out and said something. We saw several people, several former Cowboys. And I mean, not only do they care about the legacy they created, which makes sense, but it's like all these guys are guys who have been around in and out of the building. I think even, what is his name? Names are not coming to me, y'all. I'm sorry. But yeah, we saw several former players come out and talk about it because they care about the legacy. Absolutely, 100%. And they should, because they worked hard for it. But they also care about the culture. Like, they weren't just talking about, winning and getting to another Super Bowl. They were also talking about how the team lost and how they looked. And so to me, that was really telling because it says that they felt like they built something that they wanted to last. And even though we talk a lot about how, the 90s, those Super Bowls was a long time ago, and this team shouldn't be held responsible for maintaining that legacy, you can kind of tell these players do still feel a connection to this team. They feel a connection to the brand and to the franchise. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of them are in broadcasting positions, right? So they're literally going on television having to defend this team. But for a lot of them, this team and Jerry Jones and some of the people who are still in the building, it means a lot to them. And I think they hate thinking about what they went through to build what they build, everything that it cost them, everything that it took from them, and to see the current players basically benefiting from that, but not doing anything to maintain it, right? Because the fact that Dallas Cowboys are players are relevant, whether they win or lose, that has to do with what was built by Michael Irvin and what was built by Jimmy Johnson and all those guys who we saw get emotional on social media and on television, right? They had to work hard for the fan base, for the money, for the relevancy, for the reputation, in addition to the championships, and now the players, they're benefiting from that. They have a nicer practice facility than those guys ever had. They're getting paid more than those guys ever got paid. Their training camp is in better conditions than what those guys ever had. They're getting more media coverage. They're getting better sponsors. They're getting better endorsements. They're getting better treatment. They're getting a higher level of notoriety and respect around the world because of what those guys did. And those guys are like, yo, if you're going to benefit from all the bullshit that we put ourselves through in order to build the legacy of the Dallas Cowboys, and you're going to sit around here and benefit from all of it, the least you could do is show up better than this. And so I think that has a lot to do with what we're seeing in terms of just the anger. I don't think it's just about losing that game. I think it's because they know what's going on inside that building. They know the role that they played in it, and they know how invested they still are in it. And they're like, yo, this is some bullshit. And I think if they could take everything away, if they had the power to do that, if this were like if anybody's ever like pledged a fraternity, or if you know anything about that process for various fraternities, where sometimes when someone's like new in a fraternity and old heads are come through, or during the hazing process or whatever, certain privileges can be taken away, certain amenities can be removed from a frat house or from a sorority house. I feel like if they could shut down the Star and be like, you know what, the personal chefs, the hot tubs, the great training, fuck all that. Until y'all do better, it's done. It's gone. I think they would. They would be like, you know what? We are going to outfit this high school. Y'all train here now. I think they feel disrespected. I do. I think they feel disrespected. And honestly, I can't really blame them. I can't really blame them. So on that note, there's probably going to be more news that comes out, more film studies that come out. If you didn't see Okoye Media's broadcast, definitely check it out. When I get time later today, I'm definitely going to check it out. Okoye is one of those people who I love to talk to whenever I have questions about what I'm seeing on film. So like his film breakdowns are always really, really thorough. Some people don't agree with the conclusions that he comes to, but you can't deny the fact that he's got evidence to back them up. So yeah, definitely check that out if you haven't seen it already. Depending on what happens this week, I plan to be back on Friday. If you're new to my channel, or if you're just new to me this year, around this time of year is where I do still keep talking about the Cowboys, but I also have a lot of other interest in sports besides the Cowboys. That's why the channel is called Bitches Love Sports, not just Bitches Love the Dallas Cowboys. So this is the time of year where I start talking about the NBA. College basketball, both men's and women's, some of the stuff that's happening in the world of sports. So like this whole thing where ESPN might buy NFL media is really interesting to me. So you might see a piece on that. You might see me talking about some of the stuff that's happening with the NFLPA, some of the stuff that's happening with flag football and how that might affect the NFL, NBA and basketball stuff. The Australian Open is happening right now. So whatever I plan to cover, I try to put it in the title. And if it's a Cowboys exclusive piece, I'll try to keep that separate, or just do like a pre-recorded piece for that. So you'll kind of know what you're getting. But yeah, on the daily, follow me on Twitter. And that's where you can see a lot of my thoughts and feelings about the things that are happening on a daily basis. But shout out to everybody who showed up today and interacted in the chat. I definitely appreciate y'all. If y'all could do me a favor, if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe, hit that like button if you haven't, and turn your notifications on, because while I do plan to be back on Friday, I don't know for sure what time or if it'll be on Friday, and I would love to have y'all back here with me. So turn those notifications on so you'll know when I'm going live. So on that note, got to get out of here. Make sure I'm not late for my actual job. Yeah, thanks for joining me. I'm Bitch 2, and I'm out.